Hey everybody, it's Jason Blaha here with Jason Blaha Strength and Fitness, and today I want to chat with you guys and gals a little bit about the deadlift as a hypertrophy exercise. But a quick reminder, if you guys will please click like down below and drop me a comment under the video. I would appreciate it so much. Thank you. All right, apparently this has become a topic of great controversy. We see so many of these quote-unquote science-based and evidence-based people claiming the deadlift is not great for hypertrophy. They talk about risk versus reward. And you guys are standing here watching me at 48 years old. No injuries from it, deadlifting 585 there. I think my best work set on camera here is 500 for 5 at some point in there. And these are just normal, clean, solid work sets. And, so to me, when people start talking about these injuries, I have to question, why haven't you built your body up, right? I think it's a safe exercise. I think it's a perfectly safe exercise. And, the issue we have is when they say it's not great for building muscle. Well, where is your evidence? Like, do you actually have, so the people who say this, do you have any studies that looked at the deadlift that found that it produced poor hypertrophy? Or do you have studies that have shown really robust hypertrophy and studies showing very robust muscle activation? Okay. And then we'll get into and discuss real world stuff in a minute. We all see lifters all the time, barring a few genetic freaks, with amazing leverages. Have we not watched people just get thicker and thicker with deadlifts? I mean, haven't we all seen it? Okay. Right? Overall thickness. Now, it's not necessarily building your chest and stuff. No. But a lot of thickness to the posterior side of the body, absolutely. But no, really, when you start looking even at studies, and I'm not saying EMG studies are proof of hypertrophy. Okay, let us be clear. But what they do tell you is activation. Okay, generally speaking, when you look at EMGs, you can at least tell if a muscle is being worked decently. That's what it tells you. Okay. So what do they usually show? What happens when they look at most of the posterior chain? Do hamstrings get lit up by deadlifts? Yes. Yes. Do you have a lot of evidence that other movements build the hamstrings more? Like when it's compared side by side, is there massive significant differences? Pretty rarely. Well, what about glutes? Yeah, they usually light the glutes up pretty good too. Maybe not as much as a squat. But they get lit up. What about the lats in the back? Funny enough, everyone always talks about the low back on the deadlift. Oh, it's all low back. Really? You're telling me the low back is a primary mover? You're telling me the erectors are moving the weight on the deadlift? You're telling me when you guys have seen me pull 600 pounds that it's my erectors lifting it? Do you notice they don't even move? They're just a stabilizer. I want people to think about that. What do you think is moving all this weight? Okay, that's almost its own topic. What do you think is moving the weight? I mean, I'm moving 500 pounds for reps for a pretty good distance. Something is doing it. It's not my traps. They're not just, I'm not shrugging it up. Right? The erectors are not even really moving. They're just stationary. They're a stabilizer. Okay? But no, you look at this and it's like, what happens when you look at the lats? I mean, if we looked at deadlifts and EMGs, if we only went off muscle activation, people would be screaming deadlift was king for lats. I don't think that it is. I think it contributes. Definitely not king. Happens if you have weak lats, so sometimes you pull them. Okay, they're important. They're definitely an important muscle in it. But so if we go off of all the data, if we only went off of scientific data, would any person be saying a deadlift is not a good hypertrophy movement? Okay, so you've got to wonder, well, where's the evidence? Because I've only seen like one study that really measured directly hypertrophy on the deadlift, and it was a monster. It caused the most muscle growth in the study, just a normal conventional deadlift with progressive overload, caused the most muscle growth overall. Okay, so that's the only data we have. All the EMGs show it's amazing. But then you also have to look at the question of compound versus isolation. People are like, well, it's not isolating anything. But what about studies that have looked at compound and isolation? What have they generally concluded? They have generally concluded that compound movements cause just as much muscle growth in their primary movers as isolation does. There's no difference. That's then used as a defense of isolation movements, but I don't think that it is a good defense. I mean, I don't think we're questioning that isolation movements are capable of growing muscle. What people question is, can compound movements build all the same muscles you're isolating? Well, the studies are showing generally yes. So if you're going to take an evidence-based approach, you would look at that and say that. Well, yeah. But then their arguments become one of stimulus versus fatigue. Well, because we can't do a lot of volume. But keep in mind, a lot of these volume studies are questionable. They're very questionable. Because every study that's even looked at volume, 3 to 5 sets, 5 sets a week is more than enough to cause robust growth. What's debated is if doing more causes much more. But again, I digress. How many people come in and do 3 sets of deadlifts a week and build a massive posterior chain from it? Quite a few. And are we pretending we can't do any volumes on deadlifts? Sure, it's harder. Yeah, it's tough. Yes, it's taxing. People say, well, there's a cardiovascular system that's taxing. Well, of course it is. Well, why aren't you in shape? So again, the question becomes when we say, well, because it's like a squat, there's a conditioning component. And you got to be in really good shape to do any volume of deadlifting. So what you're saying is these evidence-based bodybuilding type guys are out of shape. Because if you're athletic and you do cardio and you're fit, this is not a problem. I run 3 days a week. I get out and run. I do lifts on my bike, but I actually go running. Right? I'm pretty serious about that as far as cardio and conditioning. So I would ask the question, well, why aren't you in shape? So we're now getting into a question of basically the whole bodybuilding argument against it is one of, well, we just want to be lazy and not be in shape. It's like, well, it's a lot of work to get it, but it builds a lot of muscle. Yeah, you can talk stimulus fatigue, but the stimulus is enormous. You don't need huge amounts. But I've also had periods where I did 10 sets of deadlifts in a workout. I used to do it like every Friday. I get to do 10 sets of pulls, right? 10 sets of deficit deadlifts, right? I've done stuff like that. You don't think you get big doing that? Look at how my whole posterior chain looked back when I was doing that. You'll get thick, your traps get big, your back gets, your rectors get big, your glutes, your hamstrings, your quads, forearms. Everything grows. All that stuff grows. Okay? We could make the argument that what's not growing is going to be your chest and your triceps and those things, sure. I don't think biceps grow. I've seen people make a case for biceps. I'm not a believer in that sort of stretch-mediated type hypertrophy. I've seen people make a case. But haven't we all seen it? I mean, everyone argues against it, yet all these Mr. Olympias swore by the deadlift, who had some of the best backs and posterior chains, all swore by the deadlift. The evidence, there's no evidence against it. All the evidence you have shows that it's quite robust. The real world shows many. So again, if the deadlift was so detrimental, like, oh, the stimulus to fatigue is so bad that you can't gain muscle because you'll just be too fatigued. If that was truly the case, then why did so many natural guys, how come guys even before gear was a big deal were winning the Mr. Universe and Mr. Americas while deadlifting? It was pretty normal. Plenty of them did. They were not at a disadvantage. How come we've had multiple Mr. Olympias with elite deadlifts who deadlifted? If it was so bad, how did they win? How did they win if it was so bad? Okay? But so then the argument they're making, well, it's more for strength and it's difficult and it can be taxing. So it's like, essentially the counter argument is to not be in shape. Well, guys who are not in shape, they can't do any appreciable, it limits it. They can't recover. They can't. But it's like, if you go and get in shape and you do deadlifts, you're going to be more athletic. You're going to be strong. You're going to have just a stronger structure. You're going to be more fit. It's this really bizarre bodybuilding argument of being scared of having any function. Whereas when I look at this and go, what happens if you actually get jacked doing real big movements? Okay? What if you're doing squats and deadlifts and push presses and cleans and, what happens if you start doing stuff like that? for a lot of your hypertrophy. And then you're like, well, some of those they're taxing, so you might need to be in shape. So then you go run and get fit too. Think about the difference between form over function. Okay? And I get it if you're competing in bodybuilding, certain arguments, but almost no one's doing it. 99% of fitness people out there are not competing in bodybuilding, and your difference between a professional quality physique versus a good physique is completely lost on everyone who sees you. But think about form versus function, being useful, being harder to kill, being more resilient. Okay? So if you actually built your muscle, and you can build just as much doing all this bigger movements, more athletic stuff, actually going and being fit, you're just going to be all around superior and better. That's my problem with these arguments. Are like, well, okay, so we'll concede that it's equal, but it's not, because we get all this other stuff. You're going to be stronger and fitter. It's not really equal, is it? And again, it almost feels like the people on the other end of these arguments are just lazy, useless people. They're lazy. That's what it comes down to. Sheer laziness. All right, guys, but that's really all I have to say on that today. I hope it's been informative, and I'll talk to you guys and gals next time.